Alex, can you hear me? Alex? Alex, it seems Alex is not with us. Alex, can you hear me? Brian?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Alex, can you hear me? Alex, can you hear me? Yes, Alex? Seems Alex is not hearing whatever we are saying. Let me have Brian Mutuma. Brian? Stephen? Collins, can you hear me? Yes, Collins? Collins, can you hear me? Collins? Emmanuel? Emmanuel?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you. Please quickly remind us on whatever we covered last time. Emmanuel?
Yeah.
Emmanuel, I can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah, remind us on what we covered last time, briefly. Yes, it's your turn, Emmanuel. Yes, Emmanuel. Emmanuel, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, then remind us, just something that we learned last time.
I was not here last time.
Yes?
I was not here last time.
You are not in?
Yes.
Okay, sawa. Tulikuwa tuna discuss mambo ya the Oman rule,
Yes.
isn't it? But I'm very sure, Emmanuel,
Yes.
I'm very sure you have learned something concerning the Oman rule, Sindo?
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
Okay, sasa remind us anything that you learned concerning the Oman rule. Mambo ya Portuguese rule. Portuguese ilipoisha Oman rule ikakuja. Do you remember?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. What is covered there? Nini na nini tunafaa kucover hapo? Take it easy, just anything.
Effects of Oman rule on communities.
The effects. Good, the effects. What else? What else is supposed to be covered?
Disadvantages.
Good. The disadvantages. What else?
The
Yeah. Anything else you can remember? Yes. Emmanuel?
the families.
Yeah, those families that were ruling, Sindo.
Yes.
out of two
Yeah, the Mazrui
countries.
ilikuwa Mombasa, then kulikuwa na the other one ilikuwa inaitwa na with that one. Yeah, tumesema na bahani yenye ilikuwa ya Lamu. So I'm saying with that one, we are now going to continue with our today's lesson, whereby we will start with the establishment and the impact of the Oman rules. Ndio tukasema, last time I remember introducing it and saying, after the fall of Jesus, which was in 1698, the East Africa, the east coast of Africa came under the Oman rule, whereby the Oman was a small country in Arabia on the Persian Gulf, and the Imam of Oman became the rulers of the east coast. The Imam could not exert their authority over the coastal towns directly due to the following factors. The first one ilikuwa ni the distance from the Oman to the east coast. That was the first factor as to why they never came into contact directly. Then the second one ilikuwa ni the civil strife ama war in Oman. And the other one ilikuwa ni the threats of the Persian invasion. Then from there, you actually need to know that, therefore, the administration of the East Coast was entrusted to various local Arab governors, e.g. in Mombasa, kulikuwa na the Mazrui family, Lamu, kulikuwa na Nabahan family, and the Oman rule was as popular as that of their predecessors, wenye walikuwa ni Portuguese, that is. Some governors were harsh and ruthless. Then now we go to the struggle for power, which was ensued between the Masrui and the Imams of the Oman, whereby we actually need to know that Oman was ruled by the Yorubi sultans up to the 1741, when a new ruling dynasty was enthroned in Oman, that is the Busaidi dynasty, which brought struggle for domination of the East Coast between the Mazaria and Busaidi families, which lasted for over 100 years. That was between 1741 to 1840. And the reasons as to why now they came into conflict was as a result of one, so you can write that one down, or you can note them down, zikiwa kama the reasons for the conflicts between the Mazrui na the Oman ni kwamba, the first one was the desire of the Oman sultans to control the coastal towns. The desire for the Oman sultans to control the coastal towns. which included, includes, they also included Mombasa, and also to gain control of the trade of the East Coast. So the first one ilikuwa ni the desire of the Oman Sultans to control the coastal towns, including Mombasa, and also to gain control over the coastal East Coast trade. Then the second one ilikuwa ni the Mazrui governors wanted to be independent. The Mazrui governors wanted to be independent. Then another one ilikuwa ni Mombasa had fought hard against the Portuguese and had the desire, and had no desire to be ruled by another foreign power. I mean, Mombasa had fought hard against the Portuguese rule and had no desire to be ruled by another foreign power. Then another one was that the sultans of the Oman wanted to gain monopoly of the coastal trade. So they wanted to gain monopoly over the coastal trade. Then now from there, we are going to cover about the milestone in which the struggle between the Said and the Mazrui governors took place. And therefore, in the first place, in the year 1806, Said ascended to the throne in Oman and continued with the struggle, whereby he built a fortress in Mombasa and ordered all towns to recognize the power of Oman. Then in the year 1800 to 1807, is that the Mazrui extended their rule from Malindi to Pangani. Then in 1807, Mombasa took over Pate. And in 1810, Mombasa attacked Lamu. That was 3 years after. And then 4 years after that, the Mazrui governor appealed to the British for assistance. Then in 1817, Said liberated Pate from Mazrui rule, and he liberated Pemba and Brava from the Mazrui rule also, the same year. And also in the same year, Said gained control over Bayun Island. Then in 1827, Said unsuccessfully attempted to subdue Mombasa. And in 1829, 2 years later, that is, Said paid another visit to the coast. And in 1837, he conquered Mombasa, where he murdered all the leading Mazruis. And in 1840, Said shifted his capital from Muscat in Oman to Zanzibar. Now, a question usually comes at this point, whereby you will be asked to give reasons or explain the reasons why Said shifted his capital to Zanzibar in 1840. So you can note them down. The reasons as to why Ali shifted his capital to Zanzibar ni kwamba the first one ilikuwa in order to control his East African domination more effectively. The first one was that he wanted to control his East African domination more effectively. Then the second one was that Zanzibar was centrally located and its position was ideal for trade with, its position was ideal for trade with the mainland and with Mombasa to the north. Another one was that Zanzibar had a cool, pleasant climate compared to Muscat, which was hot and dry. Zanzibar had a cool climate, cool, pleasant climate, that is, compared to Muscat, which was hot and dry. Then the fourth one was that Zanzibar had sufficient rainfall and fertile soil. Zanzibar had sufficient rainfall and fertile soils, and also was favorable for agriculture, especially the cultivation of cloves. Zanzibar had sufficient rainfall and fertile soils, favorable for agriculture, especially the cultivation of cloves. The fifth one is that its position, that is Zanzibar, its position as an island made it more easy to safeguard. Its position as an island made it more easy to safeguard. Its position as an island made it more easy to safeguard. The sixth one is that Zanzibar had a good harbors with deep waters. Zanzibar had good harbors with deep waters, and could be an international port for coal for large vessels. Zanzibar had good harbors with deep waters and could be an international port of coal for large vessels. The seventh one is that Zanzibar had fresh, clean water. Zanzibar had fresh, clean water. Then the eighth one, which is the last but not the least, is that he found Zanzibar of immune strategic importance. He found Zanzibar of immune strategic importance, which he would use to control both. He found Zanzibar of immune strategic importance, which he would use to control international trade and long distance trade with the interior. Long distance trade with the interior. Then you can now also get another question from that point, whereby you can be asked to maybe state or explain the factors that enabled Said to develop plantation agriculture yenye ina involve sasa hizo cloves ama hizo plantations zenye alianzisha. So you can maybe note it down. The factors that enabled said to develop plantation agriculture. Factors that enabled said to develop plantation agriculture is that the first one out of ile factor yenye aliconsider ya fresh clean water ni kwamba Zanzibar had fresh clean water. 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 The second one is that East Africa had great agricultural potential. East Africa had great agricultural potential, whereby he established his own clove farms in Zanzibar. Whereby he established his own cloves, clove farms in agriculture. Number 3 is that East Africa was particularly suited for large-scale crop growing. East Africa was particularly suited to large-scale crop growing. Number 4 is that he encouraged settlers from Oman and Zanzibar to settle in Mombasa. He encouraged settlers from Oman and Zanzibar to settle in Mombasa. Lamu, to settle in Mombasa, Lamu, settle in Mombasa, Lamu, Malindi, and Pemba, and plant cloves. He encouraged settlers from Oman and Zanzibar to settle in Mombasa, Lamu, Malindi, and Pemba, and plant cloves. Then another one is that agricultural activities were intensified from 1840. Agricultural activities were intensified from 1840, and it was based on crops such as, rice, maize, millet. Which was based on crops such as rice, maize, millet, beans, sesame, rice, maize, millet, beans, sesame, sorghum, coconut, and grains as well as tree crops such as mangoes, citrus, trees such as mangoes, citrus fruits, and also cashew nuts. Another one is that He encouraged the establishment of plantation around Malindi and Takaungu. He encouraged the establishment of plantations around Malindi and Takaungu. Another one is that there was the establishment of plantation economy, which intensified slave trade. The establishment of a plantation economy, which intensified slave trade. Then from there, we go to the causes of nowadays slave trade. A question can also come from that point whereby you are told to state or explain the causes of slave trade. Ni kwamba cause ya kwanza ni kwamba there was an increase in demand ama internal demand. There was an increased internal demand. There was an increased internal demand. There was an increased internal demand for slave labor on clove plantations in Zanzibar. There was an increased internal demand for slave labor on clove plantations in Zanzibar, Pemba, Malindi, and Mombasa. There was an increased internal demand for slave labor on clove plantations in Zanzibar, Pemba, Malindi, and Mombasa. Number two is that slaves were in need, ama were needed in French sugar plantations on the highlands of Reunion and Mauritius. The slaves were in demand in French sugar plantations on the highlands of Reunion and Mauritius. Another one is that there was the demand for slave potters, especially in the ivory trade. Kulikuwa na demand, that's what I mean. Kulikuwa na demand ya slave potters, especially when walikuwa na involved kwa ivory trade and also transportation of agricultural goods. Tumesema there was the demand for slaves, ama slave potters, especially in the ivory trade and transportation of agricultural goods. And another cause was that the slaves were in demand in Arabia to work as domestic workers or servants, and also to work as soldiers. The slaves were in demand in Arabia to work as domestic workers or servants and soldiers. Then the fifth one is that Portuguese needed slave labor in their plantations in Brazil. The Portuguese needed slave labor. There was high demand for slave labor in the plantations in Brazil. The plantations in Brazil. Plantations in Brazil. Then the other one, a question which usually comes from that point, maybe even in KCSE, whereby you are told to state or also explain the methods that were used to obtain the slaves. Methods used to obtain the slaves. Methods used to obtain slaves. Methods used to obtain the slaves. The methods used to obtain the slaves ni kwamba method ya kwanza kulikuwa through slave raids. The first one was through slave raids, whereby those captured in the inter and intra-community warfare were captured as slaves. Ama were forced to be slaves. So once you are told to state, you will say the first method ilikuwa ni through the use of slave raids. Then as you explain, you will just say those who are captured in inter and intra-community warfare were forced to serve as slaves. Ama were captured as slaves. And the second one was that the chiefs also sold criminals to slave traders. The chiefs also sold criminals to slave traders. Another method was that there was the kidnapping of children and lone travelers to slave raiders. There was the kidnapping of children and lone travelers to slave raiders. Another method was that, which actually I'll give as the last but not the least. And I'm requesting you to at least add 3 of, 2 or 3. Last but not the least is that the defenseless and helpless people were also taken as captives. The defenseless and helpless people were also taken as captives. The defenseless and helpless people were taken as captives. Then from there, if you can remember well, you covered something that stated about the factors that led to the abolishment of the slave trade. Factors that led to the abolishment of this slave trade is that the first one ni kulikuwa na the rule of humanitarians. The rule of humanitarians, whereby the humanitarians such as Graville, Sharp, William Wilberforce, among others, who are from mainly in Britain, they argued that they considered slave trade as inhuman and a violation of human rights. They considered it as inhuman and a violation of human rights. Then ya pili kulikuwa na industrial revolution, that changing the field of industries which replaced the human labor. That's what we mean. Ya pili tumesema industrial revolution. Ya tatu tumesema and the people were needed back on their farms in Africa. The people were needed in their farm, were needed back on their farm in Africa to produce cheap raw materials for the British industries. The fourth one is that the people, these people, would also constitute a market for the British processed goods. Now the Africans are when you slaves, so they also thought, the British people thought that we can allow these guys to go to their places and we make a market from them. So that's the point that we are saying. These people would also constitute a market for the British processed goods. Then another one, ni kwamba the machines were being installed in industries, therefore replacing manual labor, therefore replacing manual labor, as they were more efficient and reliable than slaves. The sixth one is that there was the influence of writings such as the journals of Dr. Livingstone. There was the influence of writings such as the journals of Dr. Livingstone, which campaigned against the slave trade and its evils. Slave trade and its evils. Then another one was that there was the influence of the British economists, such as Adam Smith. So the role of the humanitarians ni tofauti na the influence of the British economists. Humanitarians ni wale walikuwa wanafaitia human rights. Then our economists ni wenye wali argue that free people were more productive than the slaves. So whoever who comes to look for find a job out of his own wish, they argue that he or she would tend to work more easily and effectively as compared to somebody who is being forced. So you can note it by saying the influence of the British economists, such as Adam Smith, who argued that free people were more productive than slaves. The influence of the British economists, such as Adam Smith, who argued that free people are more productive than slaves. Who argued that free people are more effective and productive than slaves. Then from there, just analyzed the steps in the abolishment of the slave trade. And the steps that followed was that in 1822, the Moresby Treaty was signed, whereby it forbade the sale of slaves to the West Indies, the Reunion, and also Mauritius, as well as Arabia. It also stated that it was reinforced by the British Naval Patrol. It was to be reinforced by the British Naval Patrols. And in 1845, the Amaton Treaty was signed, whereby it forbade the slave trade between Zanzibar and Oman. So it's in 1822, then 1845, and then 1873, whereby Frere Treaty was signed by the British and Said Bagash. And it forbade slave trade in any part of the Sultan's dominions. Tumesema by it forbade the slave trade in any part of the Sultan's dominions. And also, the same treaty argued that all slave markets were to be closed. All slave markets were to be closed. And in 1907, slavery was finally abolished in East Africa territories. In 1907, slavery was finally abolished in the East African territories. Then from there we go to the effects of the slave trade. Effects of the slave trade. The effects can be both maybe negative or positive. And therefore, I've started with the negative ones. The first one is that Africans suffered widespread suffering and misery during the slave raids. Africans suffered widespread suffering and misery during the slave raids. And the second one, kulikuwa na loss of lives. Number 3, kulikuwa na destruction of properties, leading to famine and also poverty. Then the fourth one, kulikuwa na disintegration of families, family ties, due to displacement during raids. Disintegration of family ties due to displacement during raids. Then the fifth one was depopulation. Depopulation in the hinterland, whereby the able-bodied people were carried away. Then also another factor was that it led to fear and suspicion as people lost confidence in their leaders. It led to fear and suspicion as people lost confidence in their leaders. Another one is that the use of guns led to increased warfare. Then another one was that it undermined traditional industries and crafts due to their replacement by imported goods. It undermined traditional industries and crafts due to their replacement by imported goods. Another one, kulikuwa na loss of skilled labor force. Loss of skilled labor force. And then the last one, but not the least, was that it opened up interior of East Africa for European penetration and eventual colonization. It opened up the interior of Africa for the European penetration and eventual colonization. Then the positive ones was as follows. There was the establishment of flourishing plantations. There was the establishment of flourishing plantations. Another one is that there was the introduction of new food crops. Another one was that there was the spread and use of Kiswahili in many parts of East and Central Africa. There was the spread and use of Kiswahili in many parts of East and Central Africa. Another one was that there was a spread of Islam and Islamic culture. There was a spread of Islam and Islamic culture. Another one, there was the development of cloth and other related industries. There was the development of cloth and other related industries. The sixth one was that there was the establishment of homes for the freed slaves at Bagamoyo and Fredericton. There was the establishment of homes for the freed slaves at Bagamoyo and Fredericton. Then from there, we will go to the development, organization, and the consequences of the long distance trade. And we need to know that it took place between the east coast of Africa and the interior in the 19th century. And it involved the exchange of trade items between communities over long distances. The reasons as to why it developed was as a result of, the reasons for the development of the long distance trade was as a result of demand for ivory in Europe and America. The demand for ivory in Europe and America. The second one, kulikuwa na demand for slaves due to plantation agriculture along the coast. Demand for slaves due to plantation agriculture along the coast. And then the third one was that sugar plantations in Reunion and Mauritius. The sugar plantations in Reunion and Mauritius also demanded the slaves, the workers. Then the methods that were used in this trade was barter trade, a barter system of exchange, and later a form of currency trade was used. And then these were some of the things that were imported and the ones that were exported. Things that were imported were such as beads, utensils, iron hose, cowrie shells, cotton clothes, copper wire, red dyes, and the brace wire. The imports were as follows: the beads, utensils, iron hose, cowrie shells, cotton clothes, copper wire, red dyes, and the brace wire. And then the exports were as follows: the slaves, we have ivory, animal skins, iron ornaments. Then we have the gums. We have the gums, rhinoceros horns, copper, the bee wax, the beeswax. Then we have also honey. Then the principal trade routes, the major trade routes involved in this trade were, the first one was from Mombasa, which was via the Mijikenda area onto the Taita Taveta, whereby it branched into two. That is, one route to Kilimanjaro and to the Lake Victoria region. Then the other one, the other proceeded northwards from Taita Taveta. The other proceeded from Taita Taveta across Galana River into Cumberland. then, sorry for that, we have said the other proceeded northwards from Taita Taveta across the Galana River into Cumberland to the Mount Kenya region and western parts of Kenya. Then the second one ilikuwa ni from and the second one we have said from Kilwa to Yao, where it branched southwards to the Amatusewe in Zimbabwe. Then the third one kulikuwa from Bagamoyo to Tabora, where it branched northwards to Uganda, with the western branch proceeding to Ujiji and then to Zaire. So those were the major, the principal trade routes. Then from there, in the same topic, you remember covering about the organization of the trade routes. The organization of the trade, whereby you need to know that Arabs and Swahili merchants obtain goods from the Bayans. Then they organized caravans or the expeditions in the interior of about 100 men or more. Then the trade goods were mainly carried by porters. And remember, like you can be asked to describe or discuss the organization of the trade. So remember the first point, the Arab and the Swahili merchants obtained goods from the trade, goods from Bayans. Then they organized the caravans and expeditions to the interior, which was comprising of about 100 men or more. Then another point is that the trade goods were mainly carried by the porters. Then another one is that they traveled inland along various established routes which had their terminals at Mombasa, Bagamoyo, and Kilwa. Another one was that the trade participants and middlemen included the Akamba, Mijikenda, the Arabs, Swahili, the Yao, Nyamwezi, and the Katumas. Then, various market centers were set up along the trade routes. After knowing those participants, then you need to know that various market centers were set up along the trade routes, and the items were traded using barter system, and later the currency was introduced. Then, the items of trade were such as the ivory, slaves, rhinoceros horns, gum, which were in exchange for utensils, beads, cowrie shells, and the cotton clothes. Then also, the traders were protected by the sultans. We have said the traders were protected by the Sultan of Zanzibar and leaders in the interior as they passed through the various territories. And the last one, but not the least, was that after acquiring commodities, the caravans would then journey back to the coastal and deliver their goods. And with that one, I can see our time is far much gone, and I would like us to wind up at that point. And therefore, next time we shall continue with discussing about the consequences of the long distance trade, the consequences zilitokea. So in humble request, I would urge you, please guys, to study something or remind yourselves about the consequences of the long distance trade. And we shall take from that point. Thank you so much for your time. Have a nice evening. Stay safe and take good care of yourselves. Let's meet next time. Bye-bye.